Was there anything else you wanted to talk about before we start the interview? Is that a cat?
That's Sam.
Aw. I thought he
My
was just
buddy.
like I thought he was just like a fluffy pillow or something at
That's
first.
my buddy. He's a blue Siamese. That's my buddy.
Aw.
hmm
I love kitties. I have two kitties that might be joining us. Good afternoon. This is Kat with Transition Justice, a nonprofit connecting survivors of harmful gender medicine with legal assistance. Today, I'm speaking with Levi Hayes, an artist, writer, and detransition man. After 8 years of identifying as transgender and medicalizing with hormones and surgeries, Levi realized that his transition was based in trauma and decided to detransition. He has since filed a complaint against his former therapist who affirmed his gender identity and fast tracked him to transition. He writes about his experience on his blog, Living for Levi, inspiring others to raise their voices and push for reform. Levi, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. So I guess we'll just start with just tell me a little bit about yourself. Like, what was your childhood and early adulthood like, and what factors do you believe could have influenced you to later identify as trans?
I grew up in the 80s and 80s and 90s, and I had a rough childhood. Um, it was traumatic as far as I had a lot of issues with my identity as far as, today I'm an artist and I didn't fit the social norm of what a boy is. I was the boy that liked the Barbies, that liked mermaids, that liked the unicorns, that liked pink, that liked all of these things that were not stereotypical boy things, and I didn't have um, concepts of gay or anything like that, but I was othered that way.
Mm,
And I grew up in the rural Midwest in Kansas, and being othered that way really, separated me, and um, I was kind of failed by adults in the system, educational wise, and later in my childhood, that came from my parents too. That's when I was kind of othered by my father, and I had a great relationship with my father when I was younger, and I didn't fit what was acceptable,
mm,
and the way that they were raised, the way I should be, and I was ridiculed and bullied by my peers growing up relentlessly throughout my younger years and throughout high school. And, growing up and today, I'm still 48 years old, and I like mermaids and I like unicorns and pink, and I'm an artist. I'm an
mhm,
artist. But anyways, that pigeonholed me into this thing, and during that time we had the AIDS crisis, and a lot of stigma against homosexuals, and I carried a lot of shame throughout my life, and that turned into coping mechanisms throughout my 20s and 30s, which were alcohol and drugs, and trying to validate myself from man to man to man to man to man. And I had a traumatic experience later in in my adulthood that triggered me and brought all of this back. And that is what with the construct that is, gender ideology when
Mhm.
I was in a vulnerable position that this triggering that brought back all of this internalized homophobia that I carried brought me to a place where began to see my effeminate nature that I held when I was younger as well. Maybe I am transgender, and I started to self-identify as transgender. And so, yeah, those there were things in my childhood that heavily contributed to transition for sure. Um, I was a lot of young boys experiment with their identity. A lot of children do, and I did.
Mhm.
I experimented with cross-dressing and those things. A lot of young children, and they grow out of that. But I
Right.
looked back with the gender ideology I transitioned in 2016, and that was a period in time in our history when trans identities were very in the media and
Yeah. That was when it
increasing.
all kind of started to blow up. I feel like was maybe
Yeah, Caitlyn
2014,
Jenner.
2016.
Sure. Yeah. And increasingly in gay spaces, LGBT spaces. And so it just kind of became more and more.
So you noticed like a shift in LGBT spaces from it more catering to like homosexual people to sort of like did you
Trans,
notice a big shift in trans kind of
trans.
taking over
Yeah.
and it becoming like more geared towards or even sort of like the framework changed like it becomes more based on gender
Programming.
identity, yeah,
Hmm.
programming rather than
Sure.
on biological sex and who you're attracted to.
Yeah, and not even just like centers, even in media. I mean, even like um we had like cable channel like used to have logo. You see
Mhm.
more of that. You see Drag Race or apps like Grinder or things like that, or magazines, and increasingly more and more and more, and it becomes it's the maybe like the concept of the frog in the water, and it's
Mm, the
normalized
frog
over
in boiling
time.
water.
Exactly, it's normalized over time. And as far as programming and stuff at LGBT centers, it just makes perfect sense to me. Like, well, we have one LGBT marriage rights or gay right for marriage, and that's done. Where's our
Mhm.
next source of income or money going to come from? Transitions. So
Yeah,
that's the programming,
I've heard
right?
a lot of people comment on that actually. Like what is the next like it's kind of viewed as like the next logical step, like
Yeah.
this is the next frontier or whatever, but then when you actually look at the different goals, it's like it's completely different directions to the point where they're kind of contradictory to each other to an
Yeah.
extent. Going back to what you said about your childhood and sort of feeling othered, um, I've heard that from a lot of detransitioners for like various reasons, because um it could be homophobia, it could be like autism, it could be there's a myriad of different situations somebody could have where they just kind of feel isolated from like their peers and othered by society. And I do feel like this gender ideology in particular seems to sort of come in and be like, okay, this is what, at least in my experience, it was sort of like, well, of course, um, I had so much trouble making friends and I had these issues growing up. It's like I was because I was meant to be a boy and it's like, or I was meant to be a girl, it kind of comes in and like gives you this this powerful
Like,
framework.
yeah, a place, connection. Um, Also the othering of no matter what it is, whether it is uh, the homosexuality or the autism or whatever it is, the othering and ridicule of others causes trauma, and
Absolutely.
over time, and that causes dissociation as a protective mechanism, and that is in fact what it was in my case. And I have lived a life since a young boy of dissociation, and it hasn't been until I have started this process of detransition that I have actually learned about this and what it is. As a young boy from the Midwest, I grew up in the country,
Mhm.
removed, isolated from things, and I didn't have words for these or know what I knew is that I was different and that I was leaving my body as a kid, and I didn't have words for that or an understanding enough or enough about me to ask somebody about that because that's weird, right? Um, but
Yeah.
that's what I've been doing. And I related that when I started exploring therapy and hearing a therapist explain trauma and in children and having an almost out of body feeling. And that's when it clicked in me, knowing that that's what I've had since I was a young boy, and would have experiences of bullying and the abuse because I had abuse, and I've had sexual abuse as a young boy. Um, that
Mhm.
also contributed to all of this, but I've blocked all of this. So I do apologize in this interview if I skip things and stuff because I do dissociate a lot. I blank sometimes. So I apologize.
Oh,
Uh,
you're doing totally fine, and I just wanted to say I'm really sorry that for the abuse that you went through when you were young. Um, I know it's I mean it's one of the most traumatizing things that can happen, and we've yeah, sadly it is very common among those who have transitioned and detransitioned as well, but you didn't deserve that, and I'm so sorry that that you had to go through that.
I appreciate that. Um, this is what comes of othering people, no
Hmm.
matter what it is, and the blocking from the dissociation, the outside of the body feeling, the seeing through yourself or from outside of yourself. That those are all feelings I had since a young since a young boy growing up throughout life, and that's how it was in that traumatic experience that I had that led me to seek out therapy when I was self-IDing, that brought me to my transition. So, yeah,
Yeah.
big
And
contributing factor.
that makes a lot of sense. When you started to identify as transgender, self-identify, um, what steps did you take to transition?
What steps did I take? I I was very isolated. I self-isolated, and a lot of internet research. I was self-IDing. I researched and found an affirming therapist and sought her out. And that's the steps that I took to transition. Um, sat down with her and just went over everything that had happened and how this all made sense because I was in a state of trigger
Mhm.
and how I used to, when I was a boy, I used to experiment and I knew that I was really, I wanted to be a girl when I was a little boy, times when I had experimented with drag, when I was a young gay man, and that it was just more than that, and I was certain of that. And um, we discussed all of this. We briefly discussed my family and, how they didn't approve of me because I was a homosexual, da 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 da. But it was just kind of glossed over how
Mm.
I just didn't have contact with them anymore. And um, she just wanted me to think it over, and we would 1 week later revisit this. And so I came back and saw her. I saw her for an hour, and I came back a week later, and we just reviewed the previous week, and she affirmed me and thought that I was, ready for this and diagnosed me with gender dysphoria and wrote me a letter of recommendation for transition.
So after 2 sessions, she's already so
Yeah.
confident that this is what your diagnosis is that she's prescribing you life-changing medication, essentially.
Yes. And the only the only like thing there was no like there were no warnings, no
Yeah, it was taken very
no
lightly.
it was very lightly. There was no when we discussed the family element, there was no digging any deeper. Like, have you thought about internalized homophobia? Was there any abuse? Um, what was the dynamic between you and your father? Because there often is some kind of a dynamic between a gay man and his dad. There just is.
Mhm.
A lot of most gay men carry trauma. I'm just they do. They just do. Growing up in a heteronormative society causes trauma
And
for a home.
do you think that on top of just like society in general, the particular area that you grew up, um, like in the
Absolutely.
Midwest, may have intensified things as well?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And so that was never explored, you know.
Yeah, and I mean, this is a counselor that the purpose of their job is to explore, should be to explore these issues. But it seems like, I don't know if this is something you've noticed on a wider level as well, but it seems like this push for therapists to only practice affirming therapy, it sort of makes them do the opposite of what they should be assigned or required to
Absolutely.
do.
Absolutely. And I've heard it from many people that
Hmm.
is the case. And that's why I refer to it as, McTherapy, because it's just an order. You're just going in and ordering a transition with the side of affirmation,
Right. Yeah,
really.
that's a great metaphor. I remember that from your blog, um,
Yeah,
which is great. Everybody should check out Levi's blog, and I will leave a link in the description of this video.
thanks.
Of course, yeah. I really enjoyed reading your blog posts. But so after you were prescribed, so you were prescribed estrogen, right? And was there anything else like a
Um, Spironolactone blocker.
spironolactone? Okay.
Yeah.
So you were
So yeah.
essentially prescribed estrogen and like a testosterone blocker.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And progesterone too. Because, after that letter of recommendation, it was then seen, it was just a domino effect, is what happened. It
Mm,
was seeing a seeing a regular clinician who then referred me to the endocrinologist, and then it was the plastic surgeon, and it was just on and on and on because they all just based their opinions off of this one letter. And it
yeah.
was just a domino effect. And, I had facial surgery within, well, let's see, I had those hormones and the blockers within the next couple weeks of that letter. And then the facial stuff within the next 2 months. It was like November. I started the hormones in September. Well, August, September, and then November surgery on my face.
Wow.
And
That is
then,
so quick.
yeah, and then by May, I had breast augmentation then.
Wow,
So
that's so many rapid changes. And like for somebody who's already, has a tendency to dissociate, um, my experience like
that's
was kind of, I mean, as far as being affirmed and then fast tracked was, very similar to that. I never like I started on testosterone, I think in June or something like that. And then um, I had my top surgery scheduled for like the beginning of the next year. So it was a few months for me, but um, I ended up thankfully like deciding to go off the testosterone and not going forward with like getting the surgery. But um, yeah, a lot of people, still I see online all the time, people are like, well, it has to be a certain number of years before, you're allowed
yeah,
to do this surgery or whatever. And it's really not like there's absolutely no minimum amount of time for
yeah,
like any of these procedures or anything. And that
yeah.
always
What's said
surprises
and what
people.
happens is two different things, right?
Yeah, I mean,
For sure.
I think maybe some of these people that are saying that are basing it on maybe what it was like 15 years ago or 20 years ago or something, because back then there was a lot more gatekeeping, it seems like, from what I've heard.
Back when you actually had to live in the role
Yes,
of the gender you are, or the sex that you are aspiring to transition to, for a period of time before you ever even consider touching a hormone, right? Because that's
right.
the thing. When I saw the therapist, I was dressed just like this. I was not presenting as a female. And that's the other point that I want to point out there, is that there was no, besides the fact that there was no discussion of um, any internalized homophobia or trauma or anything like that. There was no testing
Mm.
to see where I was. You know, there are standardized testings for dissociation out there, and there's testing, there's ACE testing, just to see what your exposure was like when you were a child. You know,
Yeah.
that
Yeah, and they're
should
not
all be
absolutely.
right.
I mean, they're not performing any kind of diagnostic tests really, they're just going off of what you say, off of self-ID and,
Yeah,
and there's something that takes this serious of a medical intervention, like in other cases, I think one of the doctors at the Florida hearing where they banned gender affirming care for minors, one of the doctors said like, well, if a person has cancer and they need chemotherapy or surgery or something like that, like really invasive, serious interventions, it's like we have to have a diagnostic test to make sure that the patient has it before, we would never prescribe these like life-altering interventions without having some kind of uh, diagnostic test. And for somebody who's, like it would make sense to test for the dissociation, right? Like as, I mean,
as
at
an
its
indicator of
as an
trauma.
indicator. Yeah.
Yeah. And to know if gender dysphoria is the case or if it's trauma that's, you know, causing this.
Right,
So,
absolutely. Okay, so in 2016 was when that was when you saw the therapist, correct? And got prescribed the hormones. And
mhm.
then like within a year you had the face surgery and the breast augmentations.
Yeah, 17, I had breast augmentation.
Oh wow. You were
Yeah,
70
that spring.
you were 17
And
years
no,
old?
in 2017.
Oh,
No, I
okay, I
was
get it. I was
39.
when you started
Yeah,
to transition. Okay, that's what I thought, but
yeah,
I just got confused there for a second.
I know.
Apologies.
I was 39 actually when this started.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And I was also an adult when I started to transition as well. I was 28. I think that a lot of the conversation tends to revolve around children transitioning and minors transitioning, and like that is absolutely a huge issue and needs to be spoken about, but it's not only children that are being harmed by this, and um, people of any
Everybody.
age can be affected by it. So I think it's so important to hear stories like yours as well, because it's in my opinion, in our opinion at Transition Justice, it's not the kind of thing where you can just cut it off at 18 and everything will be fine, because you still have people with these underlying issues. And it is, the gender industry itself is predatory. Like I've heard of people that were on drugs going in and getting approved for surgery.
Yes,
We've heard of people that were, extremely mentally ill or very disabled. And then there's just this whole spectrum of underlying issues that people can have, and they're just not looking for them. Like they're just fast tracking people into this. And so yeah, anyway, thanks again for like talking with me, because I think it's
absolutely.
just as important to hear stories like yours as well.
And I was a little boy once too. And had I grown up in this time, I would be a trans kid too. That's the point.
Yeah,
And that's why I'm here. It's my responsibility to protect kids. And I mean, all of us that have been through this, we are elders of that experience.
right.
And so that's my message to other detransitioners is to just think about that. You're an elder of that experience. I'm not telling you what to do, but just think
Yeah.
about that. There's kids.
Well, I think it's very brave and, admirable that you're using your experience to try to help like younger people who are going through this.
I appreciate that, but there's kids.
Mhm.
That's it. That's it. I can't have kids, and so I have a wonderful, beautiful angel of a nephew, and I will spoil and love him forever. So,
Aw. Well, I'm sure that you're a great uncle. I can tell by the way you talk about him.
oh yeah. So
So, you said you were trans for 8 years. So, and you started the hormones and got the surgeries like right near the beginning. Um, so what was kind of your aha moment with detransitioning? What made you decide to detransition? Like was it more of a gradual process or like a sudden epiphany?
Um, I guess maybe it was kind of both because I had, I didn't have like a bad transition experience, like as far as socially, I never had a bad experience. Um, but I never, well, let's backtrack a little bit. The
Mhm.
surgeries, one leads to another, and it's very addictive. And that's how it kind of keeps the flow of money to the doctors for one thing. But I had a very it's addictive as far as like I had lots of Botox, lots of fillers, and if you were to look at my photos, it's I'm very visually different than I used to be, and it's very addictive. And but it got to the point where it was time to I had consults and stuff for the bottom surgery, and that's where I started having some questioning because I did do research and started hearing other trans women who were having regret, and that's when I started hearing some of the detransitioners and stuff. But, this isn't real, and I just put that away and kept living my life. Something will work out, sweeping that under the rug. But it was later on my 8 years that I watched an interview that was my aha and my wake up because it's that interview spoke to me on like a soul level that was just my story. It was just my story and showed me that all I was doing was trying to escape my homosexuality and trying to find validation from my parents and from society and be something totally different. Try to escape myself and my shame and my trauma. So
Yeah.
it's it was watching that interview. Uh,
Who was the interview with?
Yeah, that was Soft White Underbelly, and that was my absolute fucking hero in the world, Shapeshifter. So, Shape, you changed my life like you woke me up out of the Matrix, and I thank you so much.
That's amazing. Yeah, Shape and I have done a couple interviews together a while back now, but Shape's awesome and I'm so glad that you were able to
I
watch that
gained
interview
so
and
much.
yeah, and I'm sure that one day, you're going to hear from somebody that, you could hear from another detransitioner that you inspired them to leave the matrix. It's like we put our stories out there just to be like, okay, like I hope this helps somebody. And I mean, it really is. And like
It takes a
I'm
lot to
certain,
do that.
and I'm certain that your story is going to help somebody too.
Thank you.
I meant to ask this a little bit before, but so, what were the side effects of your transition? Like, did you have any negative health issues or any unexpected side effects that you weren't told by your therapist or your doctor or you weren't anticipating?
High blood pressure, borderline diabetes, erectile dysfunction, penile atrophy, huge weight gain. Um, I was 275 at my biggest. I'm 6 foot tall. I am tall, but when you're 6 foot tall, you shouldn't be that big. So yeah. So those are the main things, and of course the cloudiness and all of that. Those are the main side effects that I have. Besides now having to have a diagnosis of gender dysphoria, real gender dysphoria, you know,
Mm,
talk about that because I have, to have that to have insurance to take care of this.
yeah,
So that's real because now I'm this, but I'm binding, because I have these double D's here and
yeah.
because now I can't just mask it because since my detransition, it's been about really reclaiming myself in ways that I've never had before. Like, because I was so emasculated and I've never really had my masculinity and I've never cared for my body enough, really. It was all just plastic surgery. Um, so I've just reinvented my diet and my and taken on exercise. I walk and I run. I've done 5Ks now, and I do resistance training. So I've lost a ton of weight, but I've got these boobs. So now I've got this. I've had to see a therapist that can write a letter and give me that diagnosis. So insurance will take care of that.
Have you had any
So
trouble
it's
getting
another
it cut?
thing.
Sorry.
I'm
Sorry, go
sorry. Go
ahead.
ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna
Because that's
ask,
it. Yeah.
with the insurance, have you had any trouble getting it covered, to get the I don't know if you call it reconstructive surgery, but getting the implants removed?
Yeah, because you have to it's gender affirming care and they need to have that diagnosis like a
Right.
trans. So that's
Yeah,
the problem.
it's so ironic, isn't it?
And
It,
they really do need to affirm you the same way that they're going to affirm somebody going in, and that's the problem. Like we have so many problems in the system that overlook detransitioners.
yeah.
I've encountered this more than one way, three different ways actually so far. So
Yeah,
yeah,
we've had a lot of detransitioners reach out to us that have been having trouble getting reversal surgeries covered. A lot of them are uh biological females, that have had like a double mastectomy that want to get reconstruction, and then it's also been like the other way. And so sometimes people have trouble getting covered for that because these doctors will cover, they'll only cover one direction and not the other all the time. So, and it's just, yeah, it's doubly ironic that you'd have to get a new diagnosis of gender dysphoria to go back, because it's
yeah.
like we don't want that. We want to just let go of the whole framework
Right.
and
We want to let go of all
ideology.
this. And
Yes.
well, I've had a, several doctors that don't even want to talk to me unless I have a letter. So
Yeah.
so
Well, I
anyways,
guess I guess they just work with so many patients now. There's just a flood of so many patients
of
with
all
this
of
like
this,
exploding that it's like um
yeah.
yeah, it doesn't feel very
Um,
very human affirming. It's
exactly.
like you said, it's like fast food medicine. I think that's a really good
Sure is. Sure
analogy.
is. And it's a part of the system and that's not thought through for people on the other end of the experience coming out of that. I've had this with my complaint. I've also had this with my gender marker. So and
Mm. So it's
Yeah.
been a hassle changing your gender marker back as well. Were you able to get it changed back?
I'm still female.
Oh wow. So you still haven't been able to. Um,
Yeah.
what have
I still
been
have
what have been like the hiccups with that part of it?
because in August of 24, I'm in Springfield, Missouri. In Missouri, they changed the policy for gender markers because of issues that were happening in the state with locker rooms and sports and all of that. That was their solution, was to change the gender marker policy to you have to have either a court order or you have to have a medical or practitioner's letter stating that you have underwent a surgical, you've had a gender reassignment surgery, whatever you want to call it,
Mm.
stating that in order to change your gender marker. So even though I showed up with my actual original birth certificate, seal on it, everything, that was not good enough. And
Wow.
I was asked what my sex was, you know, so insensitive. And I had my court order with my name change, my birth certificate, everything. No, they want they want a letter from a medical provider stating that I have underwent this surgery or a court order. Yeah,
Wow,
and
that's
there was
insane.
there's no forethought. There was no forethought for people
To want to go
that
back.
that might be detransitioning, and there's no forethought to all of the stuff that this person might have went through, right? Leading up to just coming in to change their ID. Like they might not be as headstrong as I am because I'm stubborn, you know, and that might be very traumatic and detrimental to somebody, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. I
There's
don't when I turned in my paperwork for a legal name change as well, legal name and gender marker, and like thankfully I canceled it. Like after I decided to detransition, it was still in the, weeks or months long process of like getting filed. And so I was able to submit like another form that canceled it. And I don't know what kind of headache I would have to go through to get it switched back, but yeah, it's again, it's so ironic because I'm sure the purpose of that law where you can't change your gender marker is to protect single sex
women's
spaces
spaces.
and things
Yeah.
like that. So I'm sure it had good intentions, but then yeah, it's making it so much more difficult for detransitioners.
It's just the forethought, just and it was done without any notice either in the state. It was just done. So
Wow.
that's what I'm facing, and still in the process of figuring out. So that's where I'm at with that one.
So if you get your like the surgery to get your implants removed, then can you count that as like, I've taken
That's what
steps
I'm,
to
yeah,
change my
that's what I'm
gender
kind of
again or
thinking. That's what I'm
okay.
gonna, that's what I have a consultation coming up on the 16th, and that's one of my questions for that doctor. Can you write me some kind of a letter, stating that I'm a boy, uh,
Oh my
and
goodness.
how far that might go? I mean, come on, come on. That or just continue raising some hell with the state, which I'm currently doing. So we'll see how far that goes.
Yeah, and unfortunately that's kind of what it takes to initiate change
And
is
it's so
like
stressful.
it's like one person or a few people going through all this stress and all this hassle and like trauma. And
It's
then
just unnecessary. Like when you're going through the process of, you know, of therapy and all of these other changes to detransition, why? Why? You know, besides the fact that it's just wasting more taxpayer money, isn't it?
absolutely,
The system,
yeah.
come on. So
It's just crazy that we ever even made it this far.
that we're here,
Mhm.
that we're here right now. Yeah.
So, with everything you're dealing with, just, physically, legally, um, emotionally, everything you're going through. I'm sorry to bring up potentially another sore subject, but um so when you first reached out to us at Transition Justice, you were interested in taking legal action, but because of the time period where you received these treatments and like how long it's been, right now you're um, past the statute of limitations, which means basically it's too late for a medical malpractice suit in your state. So you filed a complaint to the Florida Board of Health against your former therapist, correct?
Yes.
Okay, and what was that process like? I know you've talked about it in your blog.
It was a
Yeah.
lot. It was a lot of digging out, digging up a whole bunch of documents and going through a whole lot of memories and and piecing that together in my mind, you know, because I my mind clouds things and reliving some things in my mind that I don't like to relive. But anyways, that took me a few days to put together and send off, and it came back with basically I was told you're past the statute of limitations, therefore we are not going to do anything about that. We're not going to investigate that, and we're not going to tell you why. So that's what I got. I feel like that's wrong. Um, Everybody should be able to at least complain. And I feel like that's ignorant to think that she magically is no longer affirming anybody after me and hasn't been for the last 8 years. How many other gay men who are in a traumatic state who want to escape their homosexuality has she affirmed?
And
Because her website states that she specializes in helping LGBT people or LGB people.
mm,
So, and I
so
know that there are tons of other gay men just like me. I've met them.
and is she still practicing?
Yes.
Yeah, so
And this is,
absolutely.
yeah,
I mean, it doesn't even matter how long ago it was. Like I mean, I
no.
a few years ago I really deep dived into a lot of the research on detransition. And one of the things I learned is that the average time to detransition from the time when you start your treatments is treatments. I have to put that in air quotes
Yeah.
um, because I don't believe that that it is actually healthcare or medically necessary treatment in the way that we normally look at that. But 5 to 8 years after a person receives these gender interventions is the average time for them to decide to detransition. So, most statutes of limitations are like 1 to 2 years, sometimes a little bit longer.
Yeah,
But
that's the
it's just
problem.
completely, by the time the vast majority of detransitioners get to the point where they realize they were harmed, like it's going to be too late to file a lawsuit and possibly, even too late to complain, which is, yeah, it is ridiculous. And I'm sorry that you didn't get a better response from them because, your perspective and your experiences deserve to be heard.
Exactly. And everybody's perspectives and experiences deserve to be heard. And that's why I chose to write about it and why I continue encouraging others to talk about theirs more and more. Like, because nothing's going to change and we're not going to change laws or any of these stupid policies unless we talk about these things. So simply. If we hide in our shame of what we did to our bodies or anything else,
Hmm.
mainstream society is not going to see it. They already don't see half of it. So, I mean, WPATH files are a great example of that. I feel, in my opinion. So,
Yeah. So how long ago did you detransition again? Was it before
I only
or after the WPATH files?
after
Oh,
after
okay. Was
I'm a
that
detransitioner baby. I just started detransitioning and and a baby.
well,
In June, this last
congratulations.
June. Thank you.
Congratulations. Welcome to the club.
Come to the club.
So when the WPATH files came out,
It
so
was like
you
2020, wasn't it?
well, I think it was just last year, wasn't it?
I
When
think the investigations, well, I think it started in like 2020, but the investigations and everything still were going on like last year. So,
Yeah. Yeah, I remember
because
I think
Redux
it
has like several
oh
entries into the,
yeah. I mean, they've definitely been being investigated for a very long time, but the when Michael Schellenberger did like the expose on WPATH, and I think it was around the same time last year that this video was leaked of like one of the doctors saying that, oh, like I know that kids can't consent to this, like they don't even understand,
yeah,
up from down or whatever he said. It wasn't that, but you get the idea. Um,
yeah,
and yeah, it was around the same time that some tapes of like these doctors talking about how they're aware that children don't can't consent to this, but they want to make them happy in the moment. And
exactly. Yeah,
yeah, so when all of that came out last year, um, and you were trans identified, like, do you feel like that also did that kind of shake your foundation of reality a little bit and
yeah,
cause you to question anything?
yeah. I mean, at the time, I didn't know about that. I didn't know about that
Okay,
but looking back and knowing about that, yes, geez.
right.
And just how many people now when like I wrote about this and even speaking about this to my therapist, just he doesn't even know, but therapists refer to these standards of care.
Right.
And he looks at me like he's like, are you dissociating? Or are you, no, I'm saying it's real. Here's the web address. Go look at this. I mean, it's mind-boggling to me how many just people, mainstream people, average people don't know about these things and other things
Right.
like it. That's my point. And I was clueless too. So
And
it's
it's
so
it can be
dark.
hard to find if you don't know what to look for. Like just yesterday, I was trying to find something on, the quality of the research on people transitioning, especially minors transitioning, is like poor quality and hasn't been shown to prevent or improve mental health. And um, I know that there are actually reviews of like this literature that are out there, and it was so hard to find anything because when you just Google it, like what you get is gender affirming care saves lives, and you get all this like propaganda essentially. And finally, I was like, I couldn't believe it took me so long to think of it, but I was like, oh, the cast review, right? Like I'll look at the cast review because I know I can definitely find
Yeah,
that. And I swear, even studies that I was able to find like a year or two ago, it's like almost impossible to like dig them up from search engines anymore. It's really been being suppressed. Um,
yeah.
so Transition Justice is a secular, apolitical organization. However, we are supportive of some of the changes President Trump has made around keeping gender ideology out of the government. There's the new executive order titled Defending Women from Gender Ideology, Extremism, and Restoring Biological Truth to the Federal Government, which was basically where he's establishing government-wide that there's two sexes, males and females, and legally protects same-sex spaces and things, single-sex spaces and things like that, particularly women's prisons. And then since I wrote out these questions, there was a new executive order, which is about the trans-identifying children and gender-affirming care. It's the protecting children from chemical and surgical mutilation, which basically says that the government will not fund hospitals that are performing these procedures on children. And so, yeah, I was just curious your take on these executive orders. Like, um, I find it kind of crazy that it's taking an executive order from
To
President Trump in order
establish.
to establish this in the first place versus, in the UK with the Cass review, they basically did a scientific review.
Yeah,
Um, and here it takes involving the federal government, but I just wanted to hear what your take on these executive orders is. Do you think it's going to help people, or what do you think?
I feel like it is causing a lot of chaos, trauma
Hmm.
for a lot of people, and it's a really hard time right now. It's unfortunate. It's unfortunate that we're here, that it's had to
Yeah,
be on this far. Um, it's unfortunate that it had to be President Trump to do it. It just makes him hate him even more and paint him even more as a Nazi or whatever. But the pendulum was so far here, now it's here, and he's just done a reset. Um,
right.
is everything about it kosher? Do I believe that? No, I don't think it is because I do care about trans people. I was a trans person. I had a trans experience, just like trans people having their trans experiences. So I don't think that it's 100% kosher, but children, back to that, children. And it has firmly taken care of things like WPATH.
Right.
So that's what
Yeah,
we is the pseudoscience radical, and that's what is being misinterpreted, I feel.
yeah,
That's what we're talking about here. That's the main meat and potatoes right there. Is the radical pseudoscience, all of that. And you know what I'm talking about. It doesn't take, just look around on TikTok, you know.
totally. Yeah, and I think like I absolutely do. I think that children and vulnerable people need to be protected. Um and So that part I'm in absolute agreement with, but it's kind of a double-edged sword that it's taking the government and like laws to prevent this rather than just ethical science and ethical medicine,
I think
because
just gatekeeping.
in the UK, it's like the CAS review is so powerful because it's like, people that have objections to, puberty blockers, for instance, being banned. It's like, they can actually look at this meticulous review by Hillary Cass and like look at what the evidence actually says and like understand why that verdict was why she came to that verdict, but
Yeah,
when it's just a political figure, especially like a polarizing political figure, that's like, okay, now it's just the law that
yeah.
that this is wrong. It's like I still, while I'm happy that
Admit
like
that.
that more children and vulnerable people are going to be protected, I'm also like we just really badly need like a scientific review. It's like I need that trust
Absolutely.
in the medical system to, I mean, not that it was ever fully there, but it's like at least I wish we could get back to like where we were, where there was like at least a certain degree of like of trust there. So yeah,
Sure. Because it's been since the beginning, it's been tarnished, you know, in the system on all levels, medical and political, once you've been through this process,
right.
that trust level.
Yeah, and then even, trust in the previous administration with our government. It's like when you have, certain language that was getting written into federal law, like birthing people, for instance, being written into federal law and things like that. It is, yeah, it's a complete 180. And it's a very like hard-handed approach. And as someone who used to identify as trans as well, like I just don't know what it would I can
And
imagine it would be really
you,
difficult because it's like, my detransition was on my terms when, culture was still way more like affirming and way more on one side of the pendulum, and it was still like a decision a conclusion I came to on my own, rather than being forced by like a government, um,
yeah,
or something like that. So I totally empathize and can see that that's going to be really challenging for a lot of people,
it's very challenging.
and we need to come up with, support systems for these people that isn't just affirmation. Um, and that's one of the hardest things is that it's kind of there's no real middle ground. Like most therapists have moved towards affirmation, and so and in doctors, therapists, a lot of times they hesitate to see detransitioners, and so and just people that are like questioning transitioning or questioning detransitioning. It's like we just need like this phrase has been kind of co-opted, but I feel like we really do need a safe space for these people to just get actual help for what they're struggling with without there being like an agenda pushed.
Yeah, yeah. A detox space. Yeah.
Yeah. So apologize for the rant there, but
No, it's okay.
so I have a question and then kind of a follow-up question that I'd really like to hear your take on. So we've heard from a lot of detransitioners that internalized homophobia heavily influenced them to transition. You've already touched on this a bit, but did internalized homophobia play a role in your decision to transition, and how are you coping with it now?
Oh my. Of course it played a role. It was 100% the reason why I sought transition. It was to escape that because I had been shamed for my sexuality my whole life. And it's just coming to terms with that through a lot of therapy is what I have. been doing, and journaling, and just taking an active role in owning that process of seeking my authentic self, not the self that has been tarnished or changed by my peers or what society thinks I should be,
Mhm.
myself. So, yeah.
That's
What else would you
beautiful.
like to know about
So, on one of your blogs, you mentioned that when you were young, I think I got the tail end of it. Um, I was a 90s kid, so I saw this to some extent as well. But you mentioned in your blog that when you were young, people were using words like queer as a slur,
that?
like in a harmful way towards you. And so what do you think about the sort of co-opting of the word queer and the way, like even for instance, like straight people who may identify as
Yeah,
non-binary or people just calling themselves queer, um, like how do you feel about the widespread adoption of that label in the last decade or so?
I think, honestly, I think it's absolutely disgusting. And I think it's disgusting because it's a slur.
Yeah.
It's just a slur, and it's just an example, another example of transwashing a community and the erasure of the LGB community. It really
Hmm.
is. And you can sit and talk about reclaiming a word all day long, all you want. It wasn't your word to reclaim in the first place. It belongs
Right.
to LGB people if they so choose to use that word. And by using that word in programming for children and teaching that to children, you're teaching them to use a word that is basically just self loathing, you know?
Mm,
You're teaching them to identify with a word that is derogatory. What is that? Queer? That's not
yeah.
cool. Why are we the queer community? Does any other community use a slur to self-identify? I don't think that the Black community calls themselves the N community.
Right.
Maybe I have to edit that there, but that's the truth. That's the truth. Or would like anybody else calling them that community or
Yeah,
any other
or for like,
group of people.
let's say like white people were identifying as black and calling it that community, like
Right? That it's the same, because many of these queer people aren't even homosexual.
right.
So,
Yeah. It's
and
it's
the
more of like
others,
a label rather than actually,
yeah,
it's so broad that it
yeah.
doesn't even really mean anything or describe like a particular group.
And the other sickening thing to me about it is that the LGB community just allows it. They just allow it to happen. So because it's affirming and that's what we do, and we've been taught that that's the thing with this marriage of the forced marriage between the LGB and the TQ plus that just
Right.
magically happened around 2014. There's a
Yeah.
whole mess right there with that. So there just is. And I think I just there is. So yes, the word queer, no, no. That used to mean questioning. That's what that used
Mm.
to mean as a part of
Yeah.
that.
And I remember you used to hear the word, like, I remember the first time I really heard that word used was like the word genderqueer used to be. a thing. It's
Yeah.
like, you're trans or you're genderqueer. And this was, yeah, this must have been around the late aughts, maybe, when I was first kind of learning about the
Mhm.
stuff. And I just, yeah, even me, I'd had very limited like exposure to that, but it's like even to me it felt weird. I was like, isn't that like a bad word? Isn't that a slur?
Right?
So,
Doesn't it feel icky saying it? I've always thought it was
yeah.
icky saying that, you know? Like you're saying something wrong here. And you're teaching it to kids? No,
Yeah,
no.
like these people calling themselves like the queer teacher or whatever. It's
Yeah. No,
it's very odd. It's very
yeah.
odd. And well, thank you so much for sharing that because I've heard, other LGB people say something similar, particularly like older LGB people or people who have kind of like stopped drinking the Kool-Aid. It's
Yeah.
like, and there is kind of this like, I'm not LGB, but I have like witnessed this kind of divide. And
Yeah, you've been exposed to the LGB a lot
yeah,
because of the T and I feel like everybody in like mainstream society just thinks that the T is the LGB
right.
because because of this. Because I've had so many people that I have discussions about what's going on and will just say, "Well, I don't want to comment on that because I'm not gay."
Yeah,
It
like
has
especially
nothing to do
now.
with gay people. It has
Yeah.
nothing to do with gay people, you know?
And especially now where there's been so much controversy about, the labels that we use for people and stuff like that. I mean, it's mostly trans activists, not really LGB people as much, but
Yeah.
it's like there's been so, people taking offense to like, oh, you can't call me this pronoun or that pronoun, like this is the way you have to talk about me. And uh it's like because it's the LGBTQ plus community, outsiders are seeing that as like, oh, I can't, like, I'm not allowed to really ask questions. I'm not allowed to question it. I'm not allowed to, um, it's like, I feel like it's people feel like they're walking on eggshells now
Absolutely.
more than ever.
They're scared. They're scared of being labeled a transphobe or a fascist or this, that, or the other being canceled or,
Right.
people are tired of that or risking their jobs or their kids or it's scary, you know? So of course they're scared of that pushback, all based off of some labels and stuff. When everything is just thrown under this trans umbrella, you know, with a queer label, shit.
Yeah. Yeah, that really sums it up and kind of brings me to my next question. So, what do you think needs to happen in our society in order to stop more people from being harmed by gender affirmation?
Again, more of us talking and having these conversations. Um, gatekeeping, gatekeeping, patience with each other and finding those middle grounds because you know, I do have, like I said before, I don't hate trans people, and there are transsexual people out there. Um, so we need to find middle grounds. We need to have studies. We need all of these things, positive things, a lot of understanding between each other, and compassion and empathy. That's what we need.
Absolutely. Yeah. Um, I definitely agree on the better science and just it sometimes it feels hopeless with this like deep political and um spiritual and ideological divide. But I mean, at the end of the day, that's really what we need is compassion and understanding for each other and just remembering that we're all human beings having our experiences and not
Because
demonizing
everybody
each
has
other.
perception. Everybody has a perception, and that's the reality, right?
Right.
And forcing people, that you can't force people, not without trauma and chaos. So
Absolutely.
how do we want to treat our fellow brothers and sisters?
Yeah, I think that's a really good note to like wrap things up on. Thank you so much for taking this time with me, Levi. And I wanted to ask you before we go, um, where can people find you? Like I'm gonna leave the link to your blog, but do you have any other links or social media that
For
you'd like to share
sure.
with the audience?
You can check out my blog, and I'm an artist. I'm a 3D artist. I'm a game artist. So if you want, I'm finally reestablishing my portfolio. So I will leave my ArtStation blog with or portfolio link with you, and if you want to check that out, you can too. Um,
Definitely. I would
Looking
love to
for
see your
employment
art.
again, so.
Okay.
So yeah. Anyways, thanks for having me. I appreciate you listening to me.
Anytime, Levi. It's been my pleasure. And is there anything else you'd like to share with the audience before we go?
Um, Again, just think about sharing your stories, and this is not the end of things, and stay positive. Just stay positive.
Yeah, definitely. Outlook is like so important.
Outlook is everything. It
Hmm.
really is. It's what you make it. Um, like I said, everybody has a perception, and that's their reality. So it's just shifting your perception. You're not defined by your past.
You're not defined by your past. Totally.